Now in this video we're going to be looking on pages Excel 12 and 13 where we're going to be entering and editing a simple formula. You use formulas in Excel to perform calculations such as adding, multiplying, and averaging. Formulas in an Excel worksheet start with the equal sign, which we call the formula prefix. And then it's followed by a cell address, range name, values, and calculation operators. Now the calculation operators include what type of calculations you want to perform on the cells, ranges, or values. They can include arithmetic operators, which perform mathematical calculations. They can do comparison operations, which compare values for the purpose of true or false results. Text concatenation operators, which join strings of text in different cells together. And then we also have reference operators, which enable you to use ranges in calculations. So if we go down to the steps now and we take a look on cell, it wants us to click on cell G5, which here is in our gross pay. Now this is the first cell where we want to insert in our formula. Now to calculate gross pay, we need to add our regular pay and overtime pay. So for example, for this employee, Peter, the regular pay is going to appear in cell E5 and the overtime pay is going to appear in cell F5. So to input in the formula, we look at step 2 where it tells us to hit our equals key. Then instead of typing E5, we can just click on the cell and we notice that the name appears. So we have E5, we type in a plus sign, and then we can click on cell F5. Now of course you'll also notice that it will color code it as well. So make sure that you compare your formula bar to the one here. Now the blue and red cell references, which is now in cell G5, correspond to the colored cell outlines. Now when entering a formula, it's a good idea to use cell references instead of the values whenever you can. That way if you later change a value in a cell on there, for an example if we change as regular pay, any formula that includes that information is going to reflect accurate and up-to-date results. Now you can reference a cell in a formula by either typing the cell reference on there, so we could have typed in E5, or we can do what we've done, and that is click the cell on the worksheet. Now when you click a cell to add a reference, the mode indicator is going to change to point, which we see down here, it says point. Next, once we have this, it tells us in step 3 that we want to click on the enter button. And once we do that, the result of the formula, which is going to be cell E5 plus cell F5, is going to give us 792. And that's what appears in cell G5. Now the same value appears in cell G15 because G15 contains a formula that totals the values in the cells G5 to G14. And since there are no other values at this time, that's the only number it has, and that is going to be the only addition. So more or less it's the same thing as saying 792 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0, and so forth on there. Of course, next it tells us that we want to click on cell F5. Once we do this, the formula in the cell calculates overtime pay by multiplying the overtime hours, C5, multiply that twice the regular hourly rate, which is going to be 2 times D5. Now we want to edit this formula to reflect a new overtime pay rate. So what we're going to do is in step 5, it tells us that we want to click to the right of the number 2 in the formula bar. Once we have that, we're going to type in 0.5. So now instead of multiplying the hourly rate by 2, we're going to multiply it by 2.5. Once we have that, we're going to click, and step 6 tells us click on the enter button, and we'll now notice that the overtime pay has changed, as well as the gross pay, as well as our totals for these two columns. Make sure that you double check your work on this and make sure that your formula is correct on there, because that is the way to ensure that you do have accurate information. Of course, once you have this, go ahead and save your work. Now, understanding named ranges is of course very important, and sometimes it can be difficult to remember the cell locations of critical information in a worksheet. But using cell names can make the task much easier. Now you can name a single cell or a range of touching cells on there. For an example, maybe you might have a cell that contains data on an average gross pay. So instead of trying to remember the cell address, maybe like C18, you can actually make a named range on there. And of course, a named range must begin with a letter or an underscore. Of course, it cannot contain any spaces or be the same as a built-in name, such as a function or another object, such as a different named range in the workbook. And of course, to name a range, first of all, you have to select the cells you want to name. So if we just want to select maybe some of these cells over here, we select these cells on there. And then we're going to click the name box, which we see right here says K5. We can click on this in the name box, and then we can type the name we want to use. So we might can type this and call it practice. Once we have that word typed in, we can press enter, and now these cells right here have now been named to practice. And of course, you can also name a range on there by clicking the Formulas tab. So we can also click on the Formulas tab on there, and then we can click the Define Name button in the Define Names group. So here's Define Names, and we can click on this as well, and of course we can name this on here as well. And of course then we would just type in the new range name in the name text box of the new name dialog box, verified our selected range, and then we can click on OK. Now of course when you use a named range in a formula, the name range appears instead of the cell address. So you can create a named range using the contents of a cell already in the range. Of course, select the range containing the text you want to use as a name. Then you can click the Create From Selection button in the Define Names group. Now the Create Names from Selection dialog box will open, and you can choose the location of your name that you want to use, and then you can click on OK on there. So that would give us that area where we can create the names from values in certain areas. And that concludes the information about editing and entering a simple formula. In our next video, we're going to be talking about switching the worksheet views.